Hi everyone and welcome. You're watching Eagle News. I'm David Oria in Washington. It's Saturday, April 27, 2024 here in the nation's capital. The week's recap begins with leaders of 18 countries calling on Hamas to release the scores of hostages it is still holding since October 7th attack on Israel. Myla Sambulan has the details.
The United States, Britain, and France, along with a dozen other countries, asked for the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza for over 200 days. The leaders say the hostages include their own citizens, emphasizing that the deal on the table to release the hostages would bring an immediate and prolonged ceasefire in Gaza. The statement adds, would facilitate a surge of additional necessary humanitarian assistance to be delivered throughout Gaza and led to the credible end of hostilities. The statement says all 18 leaders strongly support the ongoing mediation efforts in order to bring their people home. Hamas seized the hostages during a shock October 7 attack on Israel. It sparked what is described as the deadliest ever war between Hamas and Israel. Israel estimates 129 of the roughly 250 people abducted during the Hamas attack on October 7 remain in Gaza. This includes 34 who the military says are dead. Israel has vowed to eliminate the Palestinian militant group. Official Israeli figures say that the Hamas attack resulted in the deaths of 1,170 people. Meanwhile, the health ministry in the Hamas-run territory puts the number of deaths in Gaza at 34,305 people. This during more than 6 months of war between Israel and Palestinian militants. Myla Sambulan for Net 25 News.
The world's focus on geopolitical conflict shifts to a new frontier: outer space. At the United Nations, the United States and Japan proposed a resolution to ban nuclear weapons in space. Russia vetoes the proposal. Joanne Soriano reports.
Tensions are rising over the future of outer space. Today, the UN Security Council rejected a resolution aimed at preventing an arms race in space. The vote came after Russia vetoed the measure, which was backed by the United States and Japan. The draft resolution, proposed by the US and Japan, called on all countries, especially those with advanced space programs, to commit to the peaceful use of space and avoid an arms race. However, Russia blocked the resolution, calling it a dirty spectacle and a cynical ploy by the West.
Today, our council is once again being involved in a dirty spectacle prepared by the US and Japan. This is a cynical ploy. We're being tricked. This time, it's being promoted by Japan and US, who authored the draft resolution we're to vote on. At first glance, it looks harmless, it looks positive, because officially, it's devoted to a topic that's of great importance to the international community. That's the non-placement of WMDs in outer space. Yet behind this fig leaf, there was a cunning plan that was concocted by our Western colleagues. It has nothing to do with the laudable objective I mentioned earlier.
The US accuses Russia of developing a nuclear-armed satellite that could devastate vital communication and navigation infrastructure. They argue Russia's veto raises questions about their commitment to the Outer Space Treaty, which bans placing weapons of mass destruction in space.
We are not talking about a weapon that can be used to attack human beings or cause physical destruction here on Earth. Any anti-satellite capability should be of general concern.
Russia denies these accusations and claims to be firmly committed to the treaty. They say the US resolution is a ploy to distract from their own lack of commitment to a peaceful space environment.
They're cherry-picking WMDs out of all the other kinds of weapons. That's Washington, Tokyo, and their allies are trying to camouflage their lack of interest in outer space, in principle being free from any kinds of weapon. This is something the Russian Federation and China have been insisting on since 2008. As a minimum, it's as if they haven't built a house yet. They haven't even agreed that a house would be built, but they're already installing a roof over the spot where the house will be erected.
Experts warn that an arms race in space could have catastrophic consequences. A single nuclear detonation could cripple communication and navigation systems around the world. The U.S., which relies heavily on satellites for everything from military operations to financial transactions, would be particularly vulnerable.
We have only begun to understand the catastrophic ramifications of a nuclear explosion in space. How it could destroy thousands of satellites operated by countries and companies around the world and wipe out the vital communications, scientific, meteorological, agricultural, commercial, and national security services we all depend on.
The international community will need to find a way to address these concerns and ensure the peaceful exploration and use of outer space. Joanne Soriano for Net 25 News.
Back here on Earth, amid worsening gang violence and chaos in Haiti, tens of thousands of people have lost their homes. Over 53,000 have left the capital of Port-au-Prince. For those who stayed behind, however, finding shelter is a challenge. Bobby Soriano has a story.
Parks and public buildings are sheltering some of the thousands of Haitians who have lost their homes to gangs. Quite simply, they have nowhere else to go. People are scared. They're shooting in the streets. Much of the capital is now under the control of criminal gangs. When the violence first erupted in February, thousands fled the city for rural areas in the country's south. But those communities don't have the resources to accommodate a big influx of homeless people. Those who can try to leave the country. But with the airport and seaports in Port-au-Prince closed because of the violence, escaping the troubled country is next to impossible. One aid worker is quoted as saying Haiti faces a crisis where nothing works and the government is not functioning. Food and power supplies have almost run out. The healthcare system is in shambles. Although aid is coming into the country, it falls short of what is needed. Bobby Soriano for Net 25 News.
In related news, a long-awaited transition ruling council has been sworn in Haiti. This marks a critical step forward in restoring functional government in a country plagued by years of poverty and months of gang violence. Kimi Oria has more.
Bursts of gunfire could be heard as the 9 council members took their oath of office Thursday in the capital of Port-au-Prince. At the same time, Haiti's embattled, unpopular, and unelected Prime Minister Ariel Henry submitted his resignation. Henry had promised in March to step down once a council was installed, as gangs rose up and demanded his ouster. The new governing body is tasked with restoring a semblance of order. Haiti has no functioning parliament and hasn't had a president since the assassination of Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Elections were last held in 2016. The new transitional body is scheduled to lead the country until fresh elections, with an elected government to take over by February 6, 2026. Today, gangs control 80% of the capital and commit frequent random violence, including murders, rape, looting, and kidnappings. It is unknown how the gangs will respond to the new council, made up of figures from across Haiti's political spectrum. Gang leaders voiced anger at their exclusion from transitional talks. Kimi Oria for Net 25 News.
Now, quite a disturbing discovery in Ontario, Canada. 3 brothers are now facing multiple gun and drug-related charges after authorities found out what the siblings were up to. Chantel Santos reports.
In Newmarket and Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada, 3 brothers have been caught with a large arsenal of firearms and are now facing multiple firearms and drug charges by the York Regional Police. Last Friday, uniformed York police officers reported a possible impaired driver in Newmarket, who was later arrested. Upon investigating this driver, the police were led to 2 more locations where a large arsenal of firearms and quantity of drugs were located. 12 long guns, 4 handguns, 1 kilogram of methamphetamine, 1,000 Xanax pills, and 6 pounds of cannabis with an approximate street value of $60,000 were seized. Marcus, Matthew, and Joshua Borowski have been arrested with illegal and careless storage of firearms and illegal drug trafficking. Just last year, there were 20,955 drug trafficking, production, or distribution offenses nationwide in Canada. Chantal Santos, Toronto, Ontario, for Net 25 World News.
In 2022, there have been more than 600,000 malaria deaths and 249 million new cases of the life-threatening disease transmitted to humans, all from bites of infected mosquitoes. On Malaria Day, the World Health Organization calls on leaders to accelerate the battle against the disease for a more equitable world. Here's Rosel Faria on Health is Wealth.
The World Health Organization says malaria not only continues to endanger health and cause deaths, but it also fuels a vicious cycle of inequity. Vulnerable people, including pregnant women, infants, children under 5, refugees, migrants, displaced people, and indigenous peoples are disproportionately impacted by malaria. And those in the African region feels the strongest impact of the disease, where in 2022, 94% of malaria cases are there. On Malaria Day, WHO, the RBM Partnership to End Malaria, and other partners team up in highlighting barriers to health equity, gender equality, and human rights in malaria responses worldwide. This and determining concrete measures to overcome the barriers. Key steps to win the fight against the mosquito-borne disease include ending discrimination and stigma, engaging communities in health decision-making, bringing healthcare close to where people live and work through primary health care, addressing factors that increase malaria risk, and including malaria control interventions in universal health coverage. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that malaria is contracted when an infected mosquito carries the disease from one human to another, acting as a vector, while infected humans transmit the parasite to the mosquito. In contrast to the human host, the mosquito vector does not suffer from the presence of the parasites. In Washington, D.C., Rosel Faria for Net25 News.
For over a week now, student protesters put up pro-Palestinian encampment at Columbia University's New York campus. The movement has spread across other universities in the country and has led to several dozen arrests. Meanwhile, as tensions rise, administrators of Columbia commit to further talks to end the standoff. Jeff Senadad reports on Learning Curve.
The prestigious institution Columbia University is at the core of demonstrations spreading to campuses around the country. This over the Israel-Hamas war and worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. In a statement to the student newspaper The Columbia Spectator, university administrators says negotiations to dismantle the encampment will continue for another 48 hours following progress in talks. Meanwhile, the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Group had threatened to refuse to participate until there is a written commitment the administration will not be unleashing the New York Police Department or National Guard on its students. There is no confirmation of university officials agree to such terms. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, however, says she has no plans to call in the National Guard. University President Minoshi Shafik set a deadline of midnight Tuesday to resolve the campus unrest. Some students began to remove their tents ahead of it. But after the cutoff period passed without an agreement, report says students began reestablishing their presence on the university's south lawn. The pro-Palestinian encampment was erected last week. Tensions were highest Thursday when over 100 people were arrested after Shafik called in the police. Pro-Israel supporters, on the other hand, worry about campus safety. They point to anti-Semitic incidents and argue that campuses are encouraging intimidation and hate speech. Pro-Palestinian protesters, including a number of Jewish students, disavow instances of anti-Semitism. They say they are there to support Palestinians.
So as a Palestinian, is it my responsibility to be here and to show my solidarity with the people in Gaza? Absolutely. And I will continue to do that each and every day because of how important it is to bring awareness to everything going on in Gaza.
I mean, like, everyone was here showing out for each other and for, like, the Palestinian people, and like I just couldn't stand the thought of not being at camp because I was just like the whole time thinking, like, what if something goes wrong? Like, what if I could have done something to help? Like, I don't know, like, I think that this whole place is, everyone is putting everything that they have into it.
Students at several other schools have launched similar protests, including New York University, Yale, MIT, UC Berkeley, the University of Michigan, and elsewhere. Jeff Sanidad, Washington, D.C. for Net 25 News.
In other news, negotiators of 175 nations begin talks on proposed global treaty to reduce plastic pollution. The material is found everywhere, from mountaintops to ocean depths, and in human blood and even breast milk. Jay Suarez reports.
The plastics industry and environment activists disagree on how plastic waste should be reduced. They are at odds of whether it should be done at the production level or at the end of life stage. Negotiators from 175 nations are meeting in Ottawa, Canada to begin talks on a global treaty. The goal is to have a final draft by the end of this year. Stuart Harris of the International Council of Chemical Associations says cutting the amount of plastic that is manufactured is not the answer. But Graham Forbes, who heads a Greenpeace delegation, says that's an incomplete solution. Environmental activists are pleading for a 75% cut in plastic production by 2040. But oil-producing nations and the plastics industry don't support that. The stakes are high, with widespread plastic pollution having potentially grave impacts on oceans and climate. Jay Suarez for Net 25 News.
Extraordinary stories from Thomas I. Likeness today. From Russia's workforce shortage, to Ukraine Army's battle against a different opponent, to a Hippo gender mix-up in Japan. All these and more on Correspondent at Large.
And now news and commentary from around the globe. Russian President Vladimir Putin has another problem to deal with. His country is facing a brain drain. Conditions in Russia have prompted a number of skilled workers, professionals, and academics to pack up and move to other countries. They number in the hundreds of thousands since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Putin told a business forum that in coming years, the country will face a shortage of managers and other qualified workers. While not speaking about the cause of the problem, the veteran strongman says it can't be solved by importing labor from other countries. He says Russia needs other approaches, but he does not elaborate. Gambling has become a problem for the Ukrainian army. Last month, Pavlo Petrochenko, he was a junior sergeant in the army, issued a stark warning to President Vladimir Zelensky about the dangers of games of chance. Petrochenko says a surge in online gambling among serving soldiers has seen many lose their entire salaries, pushing them and their families into debt. Some were even selling off army drones and thermal imaging cameras to feed their addictions, compromising their own safety for a long-shot chance to strike it rich. Exhausted by more than 2 years of war, campaigners say online gambling is rife in the Ukrainian armed forces. It's become a coping mechanism and a dopamine hit for fighters under constant fire and far from home, their families, and loved ones. Zelensky has signed a decree banning military personnel from online gambling during wartime. And Petrochenko, the soldier who sounded the alarm, well, sadly, he's been killed in action, just 5 days before Zelensky issued the decree. In Germany, an Austrian artist has turned a copy of Mein Kampf, that was Adolf Hitler's autobiography Manifesto, he's turned it into a cookbook. Andreas Jaska Sutanto is cutting up the book letter by letter and reforming those letters into recipes for things like pizza, asparagus salad, egg dumplings, and so on. Mein Kampf laid out the ideological foundations for Nazism. The title translates from German as My Struggle. Jaska Sutanto has been working at it for 8 years, and so far he's finished cutting up about 1/4 of the book. That's taken him almost 900 hours. He Figures it will take him another 24 years to complete it. Jaska Sutanto plods away at this project at a cafe in Vienna, where he can be observed once a week, working for a few hours. His motive?
Ich möchte mit dem auf einer Seite.
Well, the 44-year-old graphic designer says he wants to show that you can turn something negative into something positive by deconstructing it and rearranging it. Silkworm farmers in southern China have suffered big losses from recent floods. About a quarter of the households in the village of Senkun make their living from the worms. These insects secrete fibers essential to the textile industry. They're raised indoors. Breeders sell the worms in the cocoon stage, which is when they're the most valuable. Sadly, the rising water flooded the rooms where the worms had been kept. Many breeders sold off the surviving insects at discounted prices to curb their losses. And to make matters worse, the floods also wiped out the village's mulberry trees. Mulberry leaves are the preferred food of the worms. And a gender mix-up involving a hippopotamus at a Japanese zoo. It turned out that he is really a she. Well, how did this happen? The 12-year-old Hippo came to Japan in 2017 from the Africam Safari Animal Park in Mexico. Now, officials there attested on customs documents that the then 5-year-old animal was male. But zookeepers long scratched their heads. They noticed the animal's unmanly toilet habits, and they also noticed it did not make courtship calls to females. Now, zookeepers could not do a close examination of the hippo. That's just too dangerous a task in such a large and potentially aggressive beast. So they finally did a DNA test, which revealed the animal is a female. I'll be back in 7 days, and in the meantime, I wish you all peace, joy, and happiness in the ensuing week. Thomas I. Likeness, Correspondent at Large, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Let's head over to Papua New Guinea, where Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese arrives for Anzac Week's commemoration. Echo Ortaleza Quinola on Oceania at a glance.
April 25 is Anzac Day. It is one of Australia's most important national occasions. This marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by Australia and New Zealand forces during World War I. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape will walk to Kokoda Track, a historic place where Australian soldiers fought against Japan when they landed in Papua New Guinea during the World War II. Marape says this walk symbolizes both countries' shared bond as true friends for a safe and secure future. Echo Ortaleza Quinola, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, for Net25 World News.
Before we let you go, here's our photo of the week. This is Deception Pass in Oak Harbor, Washington State. The pass spans 2 islands and is connected by a series of iconic bridges. It features a mix of ocean cliffs and forests and is best known for its panoramic views and amazing sunsets. Thank you, Edwin Jones, for this photo, and happy birthday to you. Thank you all for joining us again. If there are stories or topics you want us to share with you, just comment below. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and X at Eagle News Live. I'm David Oria. We live in extraordinary times. Stay happy and healthy, everyone.